This is my first view of the midnight sun over northern Labrador. It's the first major event of my year in the Arctic. The second I did not film 45 minutes later when I saw the west coast of northern Greenland for the first time. I'm 23 years old, commanding officer designate of the most northerly U.S. military outpost at Cape Atholl, Greenland in 7730 of latitude, 69 degrees west longitude. We're leaving northern Labrador now, and as I say, I didn't photograph the west coast of Greenland, but it was forbidding. Black basaltic rock punctuated by snow, the landscape in which I thought I was to live for a year. Thule Air Base, where we're landing, 40 miles away from my station, is a somewhat more comforting sight, at least from the air. The base has 10,000 men, a huge fuel tank farm, a fighter squadron, and 24 tankers to refuel bombers over the North Pole. That's the Chamberlain Glacier that you're looking at now. That's 20 miles away. It's huge. The base is also huge. It's used, or it was used, I should say, as a punishment camp for people who screwed up in the United States. And it might have been the lowest morale organization I've ever seen outside of the Canadian Post Office. Filth everywhere. But there were diversions. You could go down to the dock and look down the fjord and look 22 miles away at Wolstenholme Island, Vast Island, and Saunders Island off to the right, which you'll see later, where you could go to the officers' club and drink and listen to the second-rate acts and second-rate singers that were brought in with the entertainment of the air base's leadership. Or, if you were lucky in midsummer, you could go down and visit your colleagues on the Coast Guard cutter Westwind, which has arrived about 2 weeks early. Lovely icebreaker. On our 7th day in Thule, we finally get a Jeep. We finally bum a ride, the 5 of us who've come up from Boston to relieve part of the former crew. We get a ride out to Cape Atholl. There's my damage controlman and my electrician, Henricks. The damage controlman had bad nerves, and I had to send him back within 3 weeks. And these are 2 young boys, both on their first enlistment. The left one becomes my cook and becomes my second cook, and the right one becomes a bosun's mate during his year there. Here we're seeing Cape Atholl, or the Quaratit Bay, more properly, for the first time. It's our first view of the station as we come down into the valley and cross the little creek and look up at the 8 buildings that will be our home for the next year. I'd like to take you around that home. In addition to the 8 buildings, there's 640 acres, $3 million worth of electrical equipment, miles and miles of antenna. And what do we look at? Well, we look to the southeast, and there's a 1,200-foot mountain. Looks like a 5-iron shot from where I'm standing, but it's almost a mile away. Time and distance get distorted here. We look a lot at the scenery, at the bergs in the bay. Then there are diversions, too. We can look at movies, and we might, on a good day, go fishing, though there are no fish. You can see the skipper in this next slide pardon me. You can see the skipper 2 slides away fishing. This mountain is to the north of us. That's 800 feet. And these 2 mountains define the valley in which we live. There I am finally fishing. The double hump, as we call it out there, which is the distinguishing marker of this little mile-wide bay, is approximately 250 feet high. Again, as I say, distance gets terribly distorted in the absence of vertical vegetation. We look at the wildlife, that's diverting. And the rabbits are about waist high, though they're too shy to photograph. The days merge into one another. That's taken at midnight during July. In the 24-hour daylight from April to August, and in the 24-hour darkness from October to February, it's hard to tell one day from another. That, too, is midnight in July, looking south. amazing. It's something that life in the temperate zone just doesn't prepare us for. Some days, of course, are absolutely glorious. And there I am, behind the camera, looking out my office window down Baffin Bay. It's a stunning day of a beauty that stays with you forever. But most days are overcast and nights are restless. As the sole officer among 18 enlisted men, I cultivate solitary pursuits. Reading, above all, and writing. I wrote 2 books at that little writing stand during one of them just before the dark season and one of them during. Also, I've brought a quarter or maybe even 3/8 of my personal library with me, and in addition to that, 460 long-playing records that I bought just before coming up to Greenland from Sam Goody. Sam Goody gave me 2 days in his store at his cost plus 6%, and I spent approximately $1,100 at $2.08 per long-playing record. They were the key, I often thought, to my sanity, that and reading. Those records got played on that little phonograph again and again and again. There's work, of course, as well as hanging on to your marbles, writing, reading, and listening to music. And that work takes place in the little office, which is the 3rd room of my 3-room suite. I have a bedroom, a living room, and an office, and a little private bath. The 24-hour chronometer is useful, I'll tell you. Everything in the station is spotless. This is the crew's mess deck, a very large library for any kind of a unit, particularly a small one with 1 officer and 18 men. Everything, as I say, is kept absolutely immaculate. You'll see even the passageways are very clean. The whole station is spotless. I asked the man I relieved, "What do you do when the crew gets bored?" He said, "Paint the station." I said, "Suppose they get bored after they paint the station?" He says, "Paint it again." Well, cleanliness was a kind of religion. The station itself and its 18 men, there's the first of them. Joe Dos Passos, Chief Electronic Technician, 19 years and 6 months in the Coast Guard. He was not supposed to get this kind of assignment again, since he had already had it twice. There's Joe Edens, 33 years old, 14 years in the Coast Guard, my chief engineer. Marvelous men, both of them. And amazingly, they just took this assignment as though it were rain on a duck's back. There's some of that $3 million of equipment. That's why we're there. 50 megawatts of power on a Loran pulse. And that's a boy named Osborne. Wife bore him a child while he was up there in the dark season. He's from Boston. There's our communications equipment and a nice young 19-year-old radioman from Munising, Michigan, Ralph Trometer, pounding away on that key, keeping us in touch with the world. And believe me, that, too, was an important ingredient of our sanity. Believe it or not, that's an operating generator and an operating engine. Cleanest diesel engine you will ever see, hooked up to a Babcock & Wilcox 60 kW generator, of which we had 4. Even the fuel tanks are immaculate, as you will notice. And again, the whole ethos of paint it again, carried not just inside the station, but outside, as you'll see our International Harvester bulldozer and our 2 Athey wagons. One of the Athey wagons has just been painted and the crew has just begun on the second. Maintenance, maintenance, maintenance. Cleanliness, cleanliness, cleanliness. And thoughts of home. Here's a good antidote to the thoughts of home. One of the best men you'd ever want to meet, worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, our head cook, Ross Hurst from Norwich, Connecticut. Best cook in history. Had a little drinking problem, but nobody minded that. And there is his deputy, a boy from Green Bay, Wisconsin, that came up with me from Boston. And there is the equipment. There's Joe Edens with his first man, a guy named Morris from Texas with a grade 8 education that could fix anything mechanical. Of course, with the year ahead, we think of fall and winter diversions. The guys get better and better at playing pool. This man, a Houstonite, was rumored later to have been convicted of murder and executed, though I never really got to the bottom of that story. He did have a violent temper. This lad, a little less violent, a whole lot less violent. A nice boy from Denver who came up to replace that carpenter that I had to send back. Good lad. And there are movies. And there are the dogs. I bought 9 dogs from the Danes, or through the Danes, actually, from the Eskimos, and they provided an enormous diversion, particularly when the light returned in February. And every month, once a month, there's the station copy of Playboy. That was a racy picture in 1956. And on Saturday night, the skipper would get up at the Saturday night movie, one night a month, one Saturday night a month, and raffle off the Playmate of the Month, who then became somebody's private property. Distances, as I say, are remarkable. That little island that you see, it's out, I photographed this from the top of the double hump. That little island is 40 miles away. The days just merge. But the views are spectacular. As the days get a little shorter, you start to think about resupply. You start to think about, are they going to come today with the mail? Because the intervals between mail calls go from 3 days up to 4 and then up to 7. There's a very welcome sight, a Bell helicopter. And of course, listening for that very distinctive throb of a helicopter motor becomes an important occupation. We also do a little shooting, clay pigeons. I had some guys could break maybe 25 birds in a row. This was one of a boy from Wisconsin named Gebhardt, who was an engineer. And then, of course, some days you have something really exciting, like the Coast Guard cutter Westwind, which is sending a boat ashore with a whole bunch of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, and indeed, a couple of bags of mail. These are our most important ties to civilization, I think, and of course, fresh stuff is very important. Now, you'll notice that the young officer, instead of heading directly for the beach, and instead of heading directly perpendicular to the surf, is heading for the beach. And he's got his boat broached, and he doesn't know it, and he doesn't know how to turn it, and he broaches it on the beach, and we have a mini drama, a little bit of diversion to liven up our August. Peter Joseph Smeton, greatest ice pilot of the last 50 years, is this man's commanding officer, and he's come to pay us a visit. He sent that boat ashore under the command of Joe Simmons, U.S. Coast Guard Academy 53, visible at the left there. He thought he had a career in the Coast Guard. I think he probably was finished after this. It's a terrible piece of incompetence, and he's not happy at all. Captain Smeton sends his helicopter ashore to pick me up to come out and visit him and talk. And there's the view from the helicopter. Finally, we had to get a big helicopter and tow that boat off. The captain was not pleased. That poor guy, Simmons. We think a lot about the outside world, and sometimes the outside world comes to us. There's the head of the Arctic Survival School at Thule on the left, and on the right, Sir Hubert Wilkins, some of our more distinguished visitors. But most of all, we look out at the view, we look across Baffin Bay, and we think about supplies. Think about the way the Air Force had let down the previous crew and had left them out there for nearly 3 months with absolutely nothing. And you worry about that. And of course, the people you think about are the Army. The Army live in tents out near the ice cap and live on K rations, and they're tough as hell. The Air Force eats ice cream and goes to the officers' club and gets drunk. And who do you rely on? Of course, you rely on the Army, and you rely on the Air Force Survival School. And here they are in the next picture. Captain Winter of the Army Helicopter Detachment, and the man who came to be, as a result of this picture, known as Eyeballs Van Saun, who is the skipper of that survival school. And they did a great job by us. This picture was taken on the 23rd of October, which was the last day we saw the sun. Somehow the time passed very quickly in 2 months, and here we are, Christmas caroling. The survival school came out in the Weasel train and brought us a bunch of stuff at Christmas, and it was lovely. And we had a great Christmas. There's Cook, drunk as a loon, right by his Christmas dinner table. I think he's already knocked off one of those bottles of brandy you see at the lower right of the picture. He had a right to get drunk. I'll tell you, he did a beautiful job that day, and I think helped everybody get over that tough spot. We built a hearth, made a tree. Each crew member was appointed to be Santa Claus for another crew member, and of course we all hung up our stockings and decorated the fake tree. Little did we know that that was not necessary to do, because Sergeant Hipp of the Arctic Survival School stole the commanding officer's tree from Thule Air Base and brought that out to us. And in his honor, we put together a creche with jigsaw figurines and a cut-off salad bowl that you can see in front of the tree. A lot of things to beat the monotony. Here we are at Christmas dinner. Everybody getting as much to drink as he wants, except the 4 guys that are on watch. And at the right of this next picture, you'll see Harry Strong. At the far right, Eden's a little bit drunk there, I think, but Harry Strong was to take my crew out 72 hours each in 2 different groups in minus 30-degree temperatures and 40-kilometer winds, and teach them Arctic survival in the week after Christmas. And after that week, we have a New Year's Eve party. The crew gets divided into boys and girls, 9 boys and 9 girls. Hurst there, as you can see, is temporarily a girl, as is Cabral. They made wax paper skirts, and we had a New Year's Eve ball. And we have a couple of scenes from that in the next few pictures. You can see Hurst dancing with Corbeil. Actually, Hurst started out as a girl, but he changed sex in the middle of the party. And Corbeil was not happy as a boy, and he changed into a girl, even though he hasn't got a skirt to prove it. And of course, there they are dancing away. And my electrician's mate, Henricks, is conducting the orchestra from his chair as the dance goes on. You can see this coming up. And here he comes. He gets a little tired of conducting, and when he finishes that Schlitz at the right of the picture, he gets up and cuts in. And there's some banter over what gender who is. He says, you started the night as a girl, I want to dance with you. And it's not fair. In any case, a lot of fun. And some of the boys went even further in their embellishment of dress than wax paper skirts. We have a guy here, Captain Hook. Unfortunately, the bottom of the picture is cut off, and you can't see the toilet plunger that's his peg leg. Well, after this party, the year is long. On the 21st of January, a Bombardier vehicle with 30 days worth of mail goes through the sea ice out at near Wolstenholme Island. The Bombardier driven by Harry Strong. This is the crew the day it happened. Not a happy bunch of guys. And luckily, the Danish liaison officer at Thule, Orla Jensen, arranged for an Eskimo family. Rasmus Petersen, the right-hand member who was chief of that group of Thule Eskimos, arranged for him to bring us our mail on the 2nd of February. That ended 42 days without. We only had 11 days mail in it, but we were very glad to have it, believe me. All of these Eskimo families that stopped by the station developed one pool player. Some of them pretty good for neophytes. This guy not very good. He kept on driving the cue ball into the pocket. He couldn't quite get the concept. Some of the other guys are a little better at it, though. At the end of January, or right at the time that these fellows visited us, you begin to have intimations of sunrise. This is the 5th of February, 5 days before the actual sunrise at high noon. And 3 days later, the 8th at high noon, you can't quite see the upper limb of the sun. And of course, we're a little bit apprehensive that the 10th, which is the actual sunrise, will be overcast as well. But 2 days later, at 11:59, the upper limb of the sun peeks over the horizon. It's gorgeous. You'd think the back of the year is broken, but of course it's not. You still have 6 months to go. The Eskimos come by. This is a scene from the middle of the afternoon. We give them coffee, give them cigarettes, and they in turn give us whips and equipment for our dogs. I'm sure it was all strictly illegal. This guy was pretty good at the pool table, but and we see dogs. Their dogs, it becomes clear, are very different from ours. They're rigged in a fan. Ours are rigged in a string. Ours weigh upwards of 70 pounds apiece. Theirs weigh in the 45 to 50 pound range. This becomes a crucial difference as time goes on. Of course, as the daylight comes, we see more and more of these people. They bring us equipment, and above all, they bring us mail. And we see them beginning in late February about 3 or 4 times a month. And in March, the same. There's Al Johnson, who's the relieved Captain Winter, whom you saw on the 23rd of October. He's the skipper of this squadron now, and is a reliable person. Certainly treated us well. There's my dog team. As I say, it was bought from the Eskimos in December through the Danish liaison office, and by exercising them 4 times a week, Henriks and I are learning how to drive them. Really, we take them down to Patufic Glacier, which is 10 miles away, and back. And we hope to get a chance to make a longer trip, maybe later in the spring. There's some spectacular scenery, not just the glacier itself, which you'll see in a few frames, but also our favorite iceberg on the way to the glacier, which we call the Cathedral. And you'll see this coming up. 3 stories high at its larger peak, and really quite spectacular. There it is at the top of that picture. And we're going to go under the northwesterly steeple of the cathedral in a minute and take a picture of it from underneath. Extraordinary. Things that I will never see again. And of course, there's the glacier itself, still active, but only about 60 feet high. It's a small glacier, as these things go in this part of Greenland. And it throws relatively small icebergs. It throws the icebergs that you see off our station, because at that point in Greenland, the current runs from south to north. So all those bergs you saw back in August are bergs from this glacier. And you turn, you go down to the glacier, you look at the glacier, you maybe take a few pictures, and then you go home. And that's what the coast looks like. It doesn't look that way very often. It only looks that way right after a snow. But that's certainly the general topography. Lots of rock, no trees. And for the most part, no snow either. That was an unusual day. The guys have built an igloo, which, as you may note from the sides of it, has served also as a dog latrine as a result of their instruction of how to build snow houses from Harry Strong. That's my lead dog, Bruno. Those of you who know Shep will note the similarity of coloring, except Bruno's exactly twice Shep's size. He's 140 pounds, has lost an eye in a polar bear hunting expedition, and is one of the great dogs of my entire experience. Very few teeth in his head, but he would gum another dog to death. It's a great animal. Here we are, rigged to go up to New Thule. It's that long trip that we thought we had been training for. 126 miles in 2 installments, 51 the first day, 75 the second. And here we are approaching midnight on the first day, going past Saunders Island, which is a great bird rookery in the summer, an extraordinary place. And there is Saunders, which is like a gigantic cake stuck out in the middle of Wolstenholme Fjord, looked at from the highest mountain in the area, which is a height of a little over half a mile, and must be close to 20 miles away. Here's our camp, where we spent overnight between the two legs of the journey, and I did not have the wit to put my camera in my sleeping bag so that the shutter is slowed down, and all of these pictures, alas, are overexposed. There's Matak, our Eskimo guide, and the tent, and Ingmar Igede coming up in the next picture, the Greenlandic superintendent of schools, descended from the first Lutheran missionary to go to Greenland in 1725, and a half Danish, well, actually about 52% Danish and 48% Eskimo stock. An extraordinary and wonderful man. Great to get on the trail with. We have two sleds. There's Igede's and Matak's, and Matak is preparing our runners to go up over the Grenville Glacier. The route takes us from Cape Atholl, across Wolstenholme Fjord, up Grenville Bay, about 20 miles, which is where we are now, and then up over the Grenville Glacier. We are joined by 4 other Eskimo sleds, 5 other Eskimo sleds, actually. And the way the convoy is kept together is the slowest team is at the rear, and that's us, because, of course, we also have the heaviest sled and the fewest dogs. An Eskimo puts a piece of cloth on a whip and dangles it over the back of his sled, and the team behind chases it, thinking it's a wounded bird. And that's the way we remain dressed. Here we are on land at the head of the Grenville Bay, and you can see a team up there at the middle left of the picture going in between 2 mountains, and it's going to go up the south face of the glacier. Here we are up on top of that glacier. There's a rock outcropping that comes through, and we take the 26 miles that takes us from sea level up to half a mile above sea level. We're climbing about 100 feet per mile, and then we all come down in a 2-mile face on the north side at the Inglefield Basin. It's that middle part of the picture is the north face of the Grenville Glacier. We have to cross the Inglefield Basin, which is about 50 kilometers. We finally get to this place at 2 o'clock in the morning of the 3rd day. Our dogs' feet are bleeding. They're exhausted. They've been 126 miles in 2 days, and they don't know what's hit them. Here's the village, immaculately clean. An amazing contrast to Thule Air Base, the way the Danes live. That's the Lutheran church. And in the next frame, you'll see Igede's school. Everything done with chemical toilets that turns everything to dust. And of course, the kitchen water and the bath water just go out onto the terrain. And when spring comes, they go down into the Inglefield Basin. Everything really quite simple. There's Igede. We have to call a helicopter because I don't have a week to wait for my dog's feet to heal. Matak will drive them back to our station. And here's the village looking up at the Army helicopter that's arriving. For many of these people, particularly for the children, it's their first sight close up of what a helicopter looks like. The children are enthralled. And Al Johnson, who's the pilot of the helicopter, is enthralled with the children. You can see him here in this next picture, squatting down, talking to 2 of the Eskimo kids, while Igede and I and Henriks stand there just off the nose of the helicopter. Well, not a total success, but half a success, making that 126-mile trip. And here we are, looking back at the village from the chopper and going back to Thule, where I'll spend a couple of days and then go back down to my station with the Army. There's one of those tankers that refuel the bombers landing. And this is all late April in 24-hour daylight. There's probably the great focus of interest of that airbase, the dump. How much material was wasted? Complete brand new vehicles that hadn't been properly treated with antifreeze, with their blocks cracked, just put there. I don't know how many $1 million of equipment. It looks a little better at midnight than it does in daytime, but still, it's a great monument to the American taxpayer. The days slide into May, and people start getting orders home. There's Perkins, one of those boys that came up with me from Boston. He's just been told that he's going to go to a lifeboat station about 10 miles from his home on Long Island. And Cabral, he's the Bostonian, he's going to go back to Boston, so he's pretty happy too. And of course, the whole process of resupply and supply picks up too in May. And we see these guys more often. This time, Al Johnson and his buddy have brought us a dog. Dog's not much use, as a matter of fact. As you can see, the dog's pretty tame. If you're going to have trail dogs, they got to be a little bit on the mean side. There's the last look from my office. Again, that absolutely stunning view down Baffin Bay on a beautiful day in July. And of course, the day that 6 of us are heading back to Wrightstown, New Jersey, there's a little party. Some of the guys get a little bit out of hand, need to be sobered up. And one guy here who's being sobered up has to be carried to bed too. In any case, it's a joyous and pleasant parting. I'm taken over to Thule in the Jeep. They load all my books and records into the airplane, and I look out the airplane window and see one of the things that you see so often in Greenland, which is a cold front coming from north to south, from right to left. You actually see the weather happening right before your very eyes. And we're up in the air, in the clouds, somewhere over Labrador, over Overcast. And it's all over in 32 minutes. Seems like the blinking of an eye. Goodbye, Greenland. It certainly was interesting. My commanding officer on the Coast Guard cutter Tamaroa said, "You'd never go to Greenland as a tourist." Those were his words of consolation. They'll stay with me forever. Thanks.